very long time now. I can claim that. And it's a very timely conversation. We just had Nowruz, so Nowruz Mubarak to you as well as Eid. It was a very good occasion to, talk about the role of Nowruz on faith and on and as a unifier. And then both of those two occasions kind of happened right next to each other. I think there was a Christian day that happened on the same week, on the same day as well. And I forgot exactly the occasion, but I had people celebrating on my street as well.
I
So
see.
this was a good interfaith and all the different celebrations coming together.
And then
Um,
Nowruz Mubarak for all of you too. Thank you.
yeah, Nowruz Mubarak. Let's just begin. So I think my first question to you is, well, why did you choose to study Nowruz?
Well, thank you for having me today. To be honest, actually, I did not want to study Nowruz when I first started. When I finished my um, comprehensive exam, and I came to do my field work, and but the whole point is like I studied anthropology, and a typical anthropologist is you go and find a spot like a group of people or a community, and you're studying it, and then you kind of come you explain the whole thing. Just like to do a traditional ethnography. Um, but the questions I asked, I initially thought that I can, when I look at, and specifically wanted to do the Tajiks of Afghanistan, I wanted to understand like a particular rural setting of the Tajiks, especially in the northeast where I come from originally, and focus on like how they kind of construct themselves and all the things, given the circumstances of the post 2001 world in Afghanistan. But and what are the specifics about them and all the things. But fundamentally, once I moved inside and I prepared my entire career for the whole coursework and everything and exams for that particular question. But once I moved inside Afghanistan, and Nowruz was part of understanding the Tajiks in general. But I realized that it's almost impossible to separate, to find one thing that is only specific to one specific group in Afghanistan. And this level of intermixture, the level of interaction within the different regions of Afghanistan is kind of very, very difficult to somehow, unless you do a political anthropology because I was a social anthropologist, unless you do like a very specific questions. But if you want to understand a particular ethnic group in Afghanistan, especially in the northern Afghanistan, that would be very difficult because there's a lot of intermixture happening. People are the entire area is extremely diverse, the traditions, the talks, the behaviors, the customs. So, and then I started to rethink about my entire premise of my research. And then I suddenly realized certain things. I realized that everybody was in that time, the major theme was the idea of nation building, if you remember, like the whole process of nation building, the whole process of state building in Afghanistan. And also because if you look at the Republican period, it was predominantly, our government was predominantly run by the Afghan diaspora. Almost the majority of executive positions and other important positions were controlled by the Afghan diaspora. And a lot of resources were coming from the international community to build a state building. But the picture of Afghanistan was a picture that is fundamentally divided by tribes, by ethnic groups. Fragmentation is part of it. It's a reality of it. And so to kind of create quotas and everything and ethnic divisions, almost like kind of a European model of like Balkans and stuff to understand Afghanistan. But then I realized fundamentally that if it is very difficult to understand, if all these groups, despite their distinct ethnic, distinct linguistic, distinct even religious characteristics, fundamentally when it comes about their way of life, there is very, very little difference between them. There's a very little difference between the way they perceive, for instance, religion, the way they perceive, for instance, in a way, construct their sense of masculinity, the way they, for instance, understands how they have to, what is polite, what is etiquette, what is impolite, and the way they, for instance, interact with literature, with history. So, with all of that in mind, I asked this question for myself that what is then keeping these people like that? And I realized that Afghanistan, between the Bangladesh to Balkan to Bosnia, is the only Muslim country that has never have a secessionist movement. And it's extremely diverse, extremely multi-ethnic, multi-religious, multi-linguistic, but fundamentally it never had it. And even in despite the time of the collapse of the state in the 1990s, when that country was divided into different region groups, but none of the competing factions ever claimed to create a separate entity. They all fought on the idea of Afghanistan. Whether how they imagined in Afghanistan, that was a different thing. But they fought, the conflict was over, like for instance, whether the Taliban, the Northern Alliance, the Junbish, the what, they all put the name on that. So this is, for me, a psychological thing. And also I realized that the ethnic groups in Afghanistan is actually much more comfortable to make alliances with the other ethnic groups rather than with their own elite. The interactions with them is like, if you have noticed, I like they're more like they're much open to make alliances, to make how to say political, social, and stuff other than themselves. And so these are the kind of thinking that bring me to this question: is what constitutes what I today imagine as do we have nationalism? At the same time, Afghanistans do not present or kind of an image of nationalism that's very Western. We don't have like a national day that is states built. I mean, there are multiple national days that was forgotten in the course of time. Every regime had a national day and then it was gone. Even the Anglo-Afghan wars and stuff that the 19th of August, 18th of August or something. It is also like a contested day because it was actually happened some other day. But at the same time, everybody is together. And so the question came to me is like, what makes this group of people who call themselves today part of Afghanistan together? It's definitely not a state that make them be together. It's certainly not also a religion only, because also during the Civil War we saw the religious groups. So I started to look at the days in which at the events, because as an anthropologist I was interested to see what are the markers that actually this kind of remain consistent within these people, among these people in the course of, for instance, 100 years. And I realized that Nowruz Day, the Nowruz celebration, being national but also regional, being pre-Islamic but also Islamic, are the same thing. He's one of the perhaps the only, if you exclude religious days, but if you say something that is not religious but also kind of had its national kind of connotations, that has remained for at least with absolute certainty from the 19th century until today, is consistently where all these groups get together.
And is
And
celebrated.
yeah, celebrated consistently. It's celebrated. It's like people see something as themselves. But also, it's what was interesting for me is like when I looked at Nowruz in Afghanistan is inaugurated in the holiest place, the shrine of Hazrat Ali, the shrine of Ali in Mazar Sharif. This is the official inauguration of it. But I realized that Nowruz is a pre-Islamic tradition. It has almost, there is no religious sort of obligations to do Nowruz. It's absolutely, but fundamentally, it's also inaugurated in the holiest place in Afghanistan, in a shrine, in Islamic. So it's very much mixed with Islam in other things.
Mhm.
On the other hand, I realize that Nowruz, while it's claimed to be, it's happening in a shrine that is dedicated to the first Imam of the Shia Muslims. But majority of Afghans are actually Afghans, whatever ethnic group they are Sunni Muslims. And they attend that event. So, and the third one was this funny thing was that um, the Nowruz is seen or claimed by Tajiks or Persian-speaking Afghans as their own traditional, national, or sort of like event, right? Even Tajikistan, you see that. This is like originated among the Persian-speaking people. But in the course of 1,000 years, which I can very, very fundamentally can document, it was the people who patronized it, the people who actually turn it into what is something gets of either Turkic or Pashtun dynasties. For instance, the whole idea of the Mazar Sharif, if you look like the Timurid Turkic dynasty that established this whole complex, the whole mentality, and how it was then spread toward India and others was fundamentally it was done by the non-Persian speaking people who later adopted Persian
And
culture.
presumably Arabs, in the Abbasid era.
And so we found that also like around 1000 or maybe around one early 11th century when the Mahmud of Ghazni sent um, gifts of Nowruz to the Abbasid Caliph Al-Qadir Billah, which was also celebrated in Nowruz. So it was like suddenly the combination of all these factors, suddenly I realized that maybe I'm looking at the question of what is sense of nationness, what is sense of togetherness in Afghanistan. I should stop looking at the states as something. It may definitely come from below, not from the top. It's only partially work of the state and the elite. It's mostly come from culture. So I started to look at Nowruz and I spent a long time studying it. And then I just tried to discover very interesting aspects of Nowruz that it was always in front of our eyes, but we never actually noticed it.
That is so true. I mean, in preparation to this conversation, I realized that I don't know much about Nowruz because it's one of those like things that is given to you, so it's just
Yeah,
there, and you
yeah,
just take it as a fact of life. For maybe because of being from Afghanistan, you get so
yeah,
exposed to it that it's just there. And then I started thinking, how much do I know actually about Nowruz? So maybe I should just use this opportunity as a reason to actually read. Um, so I ended up finding a copy of a book by Ahmad Jawed. The Dr. Ahmad Jawed. He was a he was a professor of Persian literature in Afghanistan and then moved to Iran. And I don't know if you probably know him
I
already.
think he was in the late
Very
1960s, yeah, 60s and 70s.
Nowruz
Yeah,
Khosh
yeah, yeah,
Ayin.
yeah,
Very, very interesting book. So I ended up reading this and fascinating. Like all the things that you just say just resonates, all of those things.
yeah.
Um, and I guess the second question is give us a summary of what actually happens in Nowruz. I think we know a lot about what happens in the context of Iran, let's say, or there's much written about it. But I realized that much isn't written about what we do nationally and locally inside of Afghanistan in Nowruz. It had its ups and downs, for example, in periods of Taliban where it's banned. But I think families celebrate it. So you see all these families, they celebrate it. It's one of those things, like you said, it's
Yeah,
inside of your home. It's so
yeah,
personal,
yeah.
but also so national. So what are some of the things that people do, and what are some of the myths and some of the traditions and
So, I mean, when I when I started to look at the Nowruz, it was not a day that I started to look at. I realized a process because Nowruz in Afghanistan is one of the events that actually the state has no role in organizing it. It is predominantly funded, sustained, organized by the guilds, businesses, shopkeepers, Sufi networks, civil society networks. The state only comes to just do on the day of the Nowruz, to do some like all those like parades and security and put like little lights and neons over here and there. But fundamentally, Nowruz begins, at least in northern Afghanistan, which I was looking at, is it saw at least 40 days before the event itself. So it's an interesting part. I realize that Nowruz is fundamentally, in a way, merged, at least in the minds and thoughts of the people I talk to, with the idea of what Islam's supposed to be for them, what faith and piety has to be. So this was 40 days ago what the ideas of there's a lot of khairats started to emerge. A lot of people get together. When I say khairat, like a lot of people together, this sort of like creating a sense of community bond and showing your own piety. There's a lot of Khatm Quran. There's a lot of finish reading the Quran and organizing feasts for the community, mostly done by guilds on the occasions of Nowruz. There's a huge amount of Sufi networks, zikr. Zikr is it's like the Sufi chanting of the name of God and the name of the Prophet Muhammad. More, because the northern Afghanistan is predominantly the Naqshbandiya Sufi, and also you find the Gilani networks and stuff, and Sohrawardiya a little bit. So you find all these events, like a lot of chanting, a lot of prayer, a lot of like khairat events in which the people cope, the people get together, put the money together, they organize. And it's part of showing that you're a very pious Muslim. Also, they show that you have a social network. But all this kind of culminates, all these events that, and this poetry contests are happening at the same time that begin. There's a huge amount of preparation. There's a lot of fundraising to repair the dome of the Shrine of Ali, the cleaning of the Shrine of Ali, the repairment, the maintenance of that. They're all mostly done by the money that the people themselves pay. There's a different guild that actually take charge of that. For instance, the Coppersmith Guild is responsible for the Qubba Shani, like the top of the dome of the shrine itself, which is goes for the Timurid period, 500 years, but fundamentally every year that being very carefully maintained, polished, or sometimes replaced with a new one, with the finest copper and the finest bronze that these people forge. And there's one specific guild or the Sinfi guild that actually is responsible for doing it for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years. You will be surprised how. And then the whole thing, culmination of the whole thing is happening. So it's very much mixed with the idea of what is authentic Islam in Afghanistan, because suddenly the reason that actually a lot of these people go, like the Taliban and this ideological regime saw this Nowruz, is because it's like a way in which a non-ideological Islam is being performed. So, for instance, during my research, I realized that for all these people doing all these religious rituals, there's a huge amount of, like, for instance, Nat Khani, which is like the singing of the Prophet to the praise of the Prophet Muhammad, which is actually, and also a huge amount of reading Persian classical texts as a way of reinforcing one's piety and ethics and how to be a good Muslim. That's all happening around this Day of Nowruz. It's so interesting because on 2000, I think 12 or something, there's a huge amount of like this Tablighi Jamaat, which is a proselytizing organizations in Pakistan. They came on the eve of Nowruz to Mazar Sharif. And the whole idea was to like tell the people, do not celebrate it because it is not in the Quran. So then the ulama, it's created a lot of problem in the kind of a uproar among the Balkhis, and then the ulama of the Balkh, the Council of Ulama of the Balkh asked them for a debate in the shrine. And so in the morning, everybody gathered, thousands of people get gathered for the tablighs, but tablighs kind of like left at the night before, so they didn't do that debate. So you find there's like an actual contest stuff happening is what it means to be a good Muslim in this context around Nowruz. Nowruz itself being so it is and in a way you find in Nowruz, what I find interesting is I almost like I feel the urge like ideological Islam, like a Talibanism, like Islamism, or very South Asian brand of Islam come into direct contact and direct sometimes clash with a Central Asian Khorasani, a more traditional historical Islam that was common in the area before the emergence of the Mujahideen groups and Islamism as a political movement in the region. And surprisingly, they call themselves mostly Islam Sunnati or traditional Islam versus the Talibanism, which they see it as a modern Islam. So it's a confrontation between a sense of modern Islamism versus a traditional historical Islamism that come to that. And here modernity does not necessarily say something good. Modernity reflects something that is actually invented in the course of the last 100 or maybe 50 years and stuff. And I wanted to know why these people tell it, why they call it modern versus traditional. For them, the Islamic Tariqi as Mahast. And it's because it's happening around the shrine in Nowruz. And for them, Islam modern has, like they are modern Islam. And I have this conversation with one of the guy once evening. We were sitting in the shrine, and you've been to Mazar Sharif, right? This is a beautiful
Yeah.
and 15th century Timurid building, but also it has like a nice park and everything, so you can sit down there and like have a cup of tea and like enjoy before the prayer and all the things. And I says like, why you call it modern? It's like so seems so backward. And he says like, no, modern for me does not mean forward or backward. He put his hand on the wall of the shrine and just says, when I touch this, I'm connecting 500 years of history. And now you can tell me that my fathers were not good Muslims. And these people
Mm.
come and just learn it yesterday from English, from the British, from the others, and they come to me. They are modern. I'm historical. So that was an interesting way to
So
frame
it's not
that
a
thing.
positive term.
Yeah, suddenly the way we imagine modernity as something positive in the minds of a lot of people, it means it comes with chaos. It
Mm.
comes with disruption. It more represents disruption, chaos, rather than something that was steady. Maybe not very interesting, but it was calm, it was harmonious, it was something that lasted for a long time. And that is gives it some credence and credibility that we come. So that but all these events happening, the culmination of the Nowruz is the day of Nowruz. But what is specific that is Nowruz is common from Central Asia to Anatolia, obviously.
Can I
But
just ask, so when we say chilla, is that the 40 days that you were
40
talking
days
about?
before and 40
Mm.
days after.
Meaning 40. Okay, okay.
40 days after. And then on the day that happening is what is why Nowruz is common in the whole region, but Afghanistan kept one of the oldest Central Asian traditions of it, which is called the Janda Bala, raising of the flag. This is not common in Iran. This is not common in, but it was a very Central Asian Farghana, Bukhara, Samarkandi tradition that disappeared with once the when the Soviet Union, after the conquest of Central Asia by the Russians and then the Sovietization of Central Asia. But in Afghanistan, it remained in Balkh. But what it symbolizes is interesting. We think of it, they say that it's the flag of Ali, it's the flag of Jamshid, depending on who you talk about, the mythical king of the Shahnama, or like the Hazrat Ali, which is like the fourth caliph of Islam, depending on what you say. They will raise that. Some people just say it's just a Nowruz, but it's not a national flag. It's just colorful flag, and it's raised on that. But depending on who you talk, they give you different understanding. But what I realized that was very exclusive on that was that the question is who raised the flag. The person who raised the flag has to be the ruler of the country or a representative of the ruler. And that is a sign of that they are legitimate. Any person who raised the flag means they have a legitimate authority in terms of political power in Afghanistan. Those who cannot raise it, and if they do not raise it properly, that's why if you
Interesting.
look historically, only the kings or presidents or the representatives of them raised the flag. And it is a cultural moment of declaring legitimacy. I am a legitimate, we are a legitimate system. And at the same time, you have a direct conversation with over 100,000 people that gathers on the shrine. You directly talk to them. It's a moment of, in a way, the ruling class declare their allegiance to the people, and the people, in a way, accept their authority as legitimate. So if you look the whole rituals, the way it was organized, it was almost like the courtly tradition of the Timurid Empire, in which there is like a Bari Am or Bari Khas, and you have like the private court, and then with the Shrinas and only the elite sits, and then Bari Am, the public court, but the people get together, and the ruler or the representative ruler come and raise the flag. And that is the moment that people cheers, means now, and that is a sign of symbol of declaring one's legitimate. And there was an interesting thing because in 2015, when that happened, we had just the national unity government, and we have the Dr. Abdullah faction and President Ghani's faction. President Ghani factions are mostly Afghans who came from the West. They had no idea of these cultural traditions. Well, Dr. Abdullah had a lot of mujahideen, a lot of like local people who knew the things. So he came and inaugurated that.
Oh,
And he did the whole procession very properly. And Ghani was like, didn't send anybody and says, like, oh, it's a backward thing. These Mujahideen get together. They don't know anything. We're going to modernize the country. But Dr. Abdullah came and very, very properly, in an extremely respectful way, did the whole rituals of Nowruz, raised the flag, gave a beautiful speech. And in the minds of everybody, he became legitimate, and Ghani became the idea of those foreigners who came, or representative foreigners. Next year, Ghani realized that what a mistake he made. So he tried to send some other guy, Danish,
interesting.
to do that. But it was like, but the moment was like when the government forms, who can take the stage? So I remember like all the people talking, and I was like, yeah, Abdullah is Khodamos, like he knows our culture. He's kind of like, yeah, but Ghani, he
Oh,
came from the
interesting.
Gharb, he doesn't get it. You know? It was such a moment, interesting moment, I realized that. So I recorded it in my book and stuff. So
Oh, very interesting. Yeah, I just wanted to mention one other thing that while I was reading Dr. Javid's book as well, it is celebrated in almost all the provinces with different variations.
Yeah,
You focused predominantly in Mazar-e-Sharif or Balkh
yeah.
province. In fact, Mazar-e-Sharif is called Mazar-e-Sharif because of the shrine of Hazrat Ali,
Sure,
which is
I've heard,
there.
yeah.
And it is celebrated in Kabul.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
It was so interesting. There are these names of places in Kabul that I know, and I didn't know what they actually meant. So reading the book was like a moment of reflection. I was like, oh, that's what it means. Because there's a place in Kabul, for example, it's called Khaja Safa. And I
Yeah,
didn't
yeah.
realize it's actually referring to a shrine of somebody called Khaja Safa. And
Yeah,
that's
yeah.
why the
That's why
place
you do
that place
that.
is called
Yeah.
Khaja Safa. A little bit like Bukhara. Bukhara has like I think 5 or 7 piers that they
Yeah.
have their shrines scattered all around the city when people go and visit them. The major one being Bahauddin Naqshbandi, who's the head of the Naqshbandiya tariqah that you spoke about. But the same is true with Kabul. I think it has 5 different Khajas, and I didn't realize that these were actually shrines that people go and do like a mini raising of the flag in each of these
Yeah, yeah.
shrines, and they
It
maintain
happens, yeah.
it and they do all the charities and the giving food and everything that you mentioned happens in all of these little shrines, as well as in Shuhada Salihin, which is the main
Yeah,
one.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
it happens in Herat, it happens in Kunduz province, yeah,
In the
in
northern
Ghazni.
Afghanistan, you can find it. There's a lot of shrines from Imam Sahib to Akhoy. It almost like a mini Janda is happening there. In Herat, you don't have Janda very much, but the other part of Nowruz is the same. In Kabul, we do that only do it within the Shia community in west of Kabul that there is a Janda. But for the rest of the people, we do the only legitimate Janda for the, if Heratis or Kabulis is the one that's raised in Mazar. In the Pashtun areas of Afghanistan, it used to be very common. But with the spread of Taliban and Mujahideen, it declined tremendously. But fundamentally, still, you can find it that in Kandahar, there is a huge ziyarat called Ziyarat Khakres. And people get together at that particular day of Nowruz and just celebrate the nature. They don't have Janda. For them, that the Janda that is raised in Mazar is the original one. You don't need to raise it again here, too. In Jalabad, it used to be, but it declined in them because Jalabad was like the most influenced by the Pakistani like sort of things, and also like the idea of the Pashtun nationalism, sort of legitimacy Pashtun nationalism that moved beyond it. But fundamentally, they have the something thing they call it the Orange Flower Festival, which is a copy of the Red Poppy Festival or Tulip Festival in Mazar Sharif. So you find that things, but you have also a lot of Pashtun settlers who moved to the northern Afghanistan in the course of 20th century, and now they completely adopted that tradition as part of their own that they do that. So you find it in different things. There's a huge amount of, but also at the same time, there's a huge amount of backlash, specifically since the Mujahideen period against Nowruz. There's a massive amount of propaganda that it's not Islamic, you should not do that. So Nowruz is also why the everybody celebrates that. There is a massive, even like a crazy debate almost happening around about how you should not do it. So there is a that is like as an anthropologist for me that was a gold mine because suddenly I tap into this conversation that nobody actually look at that and some people reject it as like oh this is a backwards, but it's actually the whole debate about the nature of Islam, what it means to be a Muslim, what it means to be from Afghanistan is also taking place around this particular event. So yeah, yeah, this is you find it in different parts, but depends. Yeah,
So I think you touched upon it. So this leads to exactly to my other question, which is we've had governments and regimes and states from different
yeah,
ideological end of the spectrum, if you like. And essentially, we had the communists, and then prior to that, at the same time, simultaneously, we had the Mujahideen group that were fighting.
yeah,
So you had
yeah,
the country scattered
yeah,
between these different factions and ideologies. Before that, we had the king and the monarchy.
yeah.
And after that, the republic. We had Taliban in 2 different periods. And I guess my question is, how is Nowruz treated by the state, by these different
Okay.
states? So I remember reading in one of your writings that the communists also banned Nowruz at one point. So why would they do that?
So it's an interesting thing because the states initially had nothing to do with the Nowruz, but always patronized it. the idea of a state being a patronizing, like patronize the shrine, patronize the event, as sign traditionally, a sign of being a legitimate authority. That we see still today the remnants of it through the gender bara tradition. Historically, that was the whole point of the state. But in the 20th century, in Afghanistan, the state started to co-opt Nowruz as part of what it called the project of creating a nation state of Afghanistan. As part of that, the whole, but it was not a contested tradition, which means until the 1970s, until the overthrow of the Shah, both religion, faith, and these traditions were not contested. Like the idea of having a historical faith was kind of like accepted. Nobody ever questioned that, oh, I am less Muslim or more Muslim in Afghanistan, or this is Islamic or not Islamic. That idea of contesting or Islamizing everything. And that is a difference between an ideological Islam versus a historical Islam. A historical Islam has a space for culture, has a space for like traditions, has a space for time. Ideological Islam acts like almost like communism. It's either good or bad. There's little gray space in between they accommodate. You either follow the tenets of the ideology or you refuse it. So the state co-opted the Nowruz in Afghanistan. We see that initially for the first time in the late 19th century, in which the state officially used the Nowruz events as kind of as a as a way of declaring its legitimacy, but also as a way of then announcing its authority, but also like taxation and organizing like the whole like annual fiscal years and everything using Nowruz as a starting point. And that was not new because it originally happened all the way under the time of the Seljuk Empire, which Nizam al-Mulk used that tradition as way of organizing the taxation model of the empire all the way in the 11th
And
century
the
and
calendar.
stuff. Yeah, the calendar and everything else. So the state redone that under Abdurrahman King Abdurrahman Khan in that particular period. But once Afghanistan entered the age, once after the Soviet Union, if you see, for instance, Nowruz almost disappeared as a religious national event in Central Asia because the Soviets saw that as a part of intertwined with Islam, with religion. So, but the communists all it was
It's
part
so
of,
funny.
as part of the all like the Sovietization of Central Asia was like to remove anything that was called backward, right? Or superstitious elements. And Nowruz was in Central Asia, northern Afghanistan, as I mentioned before, that only remain in Afghanistan today was fundamentally mixed with Islam. It was always celebrated in shrines. And part of the Soviet policy was to remove these things and replace it with what they call the new model of government and modernity, whatever the Soviet Marxist modernity, whatever you can call it. So that's when the communists coming in the very beginning, they were also started against like Akib Mondagi, the
Backwardness.
backwardness and like all the things. This is a backward things, but also because it was associated with religion tremendously. So it was a targeted, but it was a very short period. Surprisingly, Nowruz was crushed because it's association with religious by the communists and crushed by the Taliban because it's not religious enough. You know, at the
I'm
same
surprised
time.
it survived.
And that's a genius of it. That's what I thought that that was part of my conclusion that um, it survived almost all assaults. Even today, it became even much more contested. It was banned, but it's celebrated at the same time. It's a form of resistance. But the ability and that like how a contested tradition survives. For instance, after 5 years of banning in 1990s by the Taliban, the first thing I remember that when the Taliban fell, the Nowruz of 2002, in the March 2002, when Sohrabani kind of came and Karzai came, it was suddenly, I remember my mom was like, oh, thank God, now normalcy is back. We are back to normal time. The age of, so mentally, for a lot of people, it represented a sense of continuity with a past that may be slightly mythologized, but a past that was less contested, a past of harmonious past. And the man's like, for instance, my mom is like a traditional woman looking at all the things. And it's like, I remember in 2002 when for the first time after many years Nowruz was celebrated. And
It's a moment of joy.
yeah, it's a moment of joy, moment of renewal, and also a moment of the end of the Taliban darkness, an ideological darkness that in a way engulfed Afghanistan for such a long time by them. So, and that was like, look at that. And to me, looking the life of Nowruz, which is, I think, inextricably kind of linked with the life of the Afghan people themselves, in a sense. I realized that the idea of who we are, what is our identity, it is not actually state made. It's not, state does play a very little role in shaping who we are. It's the cultural traditions, it's ourselves, it's from the bottom that we slowly build ourselves and see who we are and what we are. If you look at that, in other places, you see the state forms you through education, to whatever model, through massive celebrations, give you a sense of who you are, create mythological stories about your origin. We don't have an origin history in that sense. And also, the state, if the state tells us what we are, we actually don't like that state, to be honest. It's like the rule of the cultural tradition is so deep and strong that the identity is formed from outside. And that kind of comes back to my first question. What keeps Afghanistan together? Why it is not being, why there is no secessionist movement? We have more Tajiks than Tajikistan. We have like one-fifth of the all Uzbeks of the world. We have Kyrgyz, we have Kazakhs, we have Turkmens. I mean, Jesus, like these people should have gone the other side and joined their co-ethnics long time ago. But fundamentally, I realized that it was never the center that kept Afghanistan together. It was always the periphery that kept the center together. It's these groups that actually protect the state, protect the integrity of what is today called Afghanistan. And whenever a centralized government come and try to control everything and impose its own sort of way of specific thinking in the
Narrative.
name of whatever modernism you call it, in the name of like reform you call it, or creating a national identity you call it, it's been rejected and it goes away. Because the different parts of Afghanistan, maybe not a very old country, maybe 400 years old, but the regions of Afghanistan goes back 2,500 years. If you look at the provinces of Achaemenid Empire, Haham and Ishian, the regions of Afghanistan is exactly the same regions as it has been. Northern Afghanistan, Bakhtiar, West, East. It has been exactly the same geographies that has been 2,500 years ago. That,
And similar names.
and similar
Similar
names
names.
and everything. Well, maybe people in that changed, demography changed. Even the states changed, but the regions remained very, very solid for 2,500 years. And I ask you to look at the map of the provinces of the Achaemenid Empire. It's surprising, like how these old affiliations, old identities, old sort of structures continue to regenerate itself despite enormous problems. So that's came to me, and I just came to sort of think that I think the opposition of ideological states to Nowruz is that they want ideological states or what we call authoritarian states in Afghanistan always wants to impose its own specific version of what it's supposed to be, how everybody's supposed to be on Afghanistan. And a lot of people, and they oppose Nowruz because Nowruz is a window through which a lot of Afghans fight back and say, no, we want to keep what we are. So it's almost a very contested space, if you want to look up that. I don't know if I make sense to you, but please correct me if I.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely, absolutely. I mean, I find it fascinating. The point that you made, about the fact that the rise of communism saw Nowruz as a religious thing, therefore it
Yeah,
should be banned.
yeah,
And then we also have this opposite end
yeah,
who's saying this is not religious. What are you doing? And
yeah,
bans it. So this is the genius of Nowruz that survives. And I think you mentioned rightly that the fact that it comes from the people and
yeah,
it's a bottom up thing that
yeah.
survives, that
That
exists,
survives. Yeah,
and that principle can be extrapolated in so many different ways. And in my own studies of various shortcomings of the Republic period, one of the principles upon which we talk about is exactly that. Afghanistan is a decentralized country. Afghanistan
yeah,
has its own cultural,
yeah,
practices and things that have held it together through time.
yeah.
And as a state,
It's
when you
not a
come
bad
in and you
thing.
try to,
They always see it as this as something
absolutely,
that disintegrated. No, actually, it keeps it together. It doesn't
exactly.
fragment it.
The
It's
very
quite
thing
the
that keeps it
yeah,
together is
together.
the thing that should be promoted. And
Yeah,
paradoxically, somehow, even the Republic, when it comes, it tries to suppress that. And that
yeah,
central the center imposing itself on the
Yeah.
periphery. I don't know how we have ended up with this idea, with this principle that still haunts us in this day. Um, what about prior to Abdurrahman Khan? I guess the role of the British, in the subcontinent and in the wider region. Have they played in a much bigger role in minimizing Nowruz as a thing? Because I was reading, like you said earlier, even prior to Sultan Mahmud sending things to Abbasid caliphs, because there were Baramakis there were, other Khurasanis, Abu Muslim Khurasani, for example, and they were as much part of the Abbasid
Yeah.
period as any
Yeah.
other group. So Nowruz became a much bigger thing because of their presence, and they brought it as a cultural thing. Um, so it had existed and spread, like you said, by these different dynasties all across the subcontinent, through Ottoman Empire and various other
Yeah.
parts. It was celebrated in Egypt, I read, and there seems to be like a cutoff point with the arrival of the empire, the Western empires, and
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
kind of
Yeah.
reduces it. And that coincides with the rise of the ideological Islam, if you like, out of Saudi
Yeah.
Arabia.
Yeah. And out of
Uh,
subcontinent. Yeah. Out of
yeah.
subcontinent. Yeah.
How does the two, what kind of role the two, I guess, plays in kind of creating this clash, this confrontation with Nowruz?
I think when I look at Nowruz, I'm looking at it not as for itself, but if you spread all across from the Abbasid period, we can have that. Probably it was existed before the Islam. I'm pretty sure it did exist. Maybe not exactly the same form, but it had like a different form because it's actually associated extremely with the nature and all things. But I'm looking at, for instance, the spread of Nowruz, for instance, in the Indian subcontinent or the Middle East and stuff. And it was not by itself just because of the empires coming and taking it. Nowruz was part of like what I can call like almost like a civilizational kit, as part of what we historically always call the Turco-Persian tradition or Turco-Persian model of governance, model of culture. It has its own culture, it was an etiquette, a model of governance that developed, like for instance, for the last 1,000 years since the and slowly spread all the way from to Anatolia, the Ottomans in Egypt, and also specifically moved towards the subcontinent and Indian subcontinent and stuff. And Nowruz was part of that, part of like the makeup of that, what we call the Turco-Persian model, which has its own governance philosophy, culture, etiquette, poetry, art, way of governance, religion. They had its, for instance, if you look at the whole Renaissance Herati school of miniature, the Timurid art, if you look at the Timurid art is fundamentally cannot be understood without understanding the Turco-Persian model of culture in that particular time. For instance, we need to know Nizami, we need to know Ibn Arabi, we need to know Islam very good in order to understand, for instance, the work of Kamaluddin Behzad. So it is like Nowruz came as a part of a tradition, a civilizational kind of a model that ruled the region at least for a millennia, at least for a millennia. And by the, let's say, 18th, 19th century, with the collapse of the Timurid Empire in India and the decline of the Ottomans in the Middle East and stuff, that slowly disappeared. But at least we know for the British, it was, we know that for a specific date, 1835 or something, in which they specifically banned the educational curriculum, educational model that of the Turco-Persian in subcontinent and replaced it with English. In Central Asia, it happened in the early 20th century, in which they banned the traditional model and brought more European model. I'm not saying it was bad, but it was like erasing one system, breaking that system. In Afghanistan, it was different. The modern education entered without necessarily displacing the old model that already exists. It's kind of like worked in parallel because it was not happened through a colonial interjection. It happened
I
through
think we
more
can
more.
use the word madrasa, not in its modern
Yeah,
controversial
yeah.
context that has been created, but I think you're referring to madrasas who have coexisted with the modern schooling
Well,
system.
absolutely.
for
modern school
millennia in
system.
Afghanistan.
And it has its fellowship programs, it has its own direct. For instance, I was reading the Ibn Battuta's travelogue that travels from Middle East and then come to Central Asia and Afghanistan, go to India. The level, the network that literally provided funding for this man to go from one place to another place, it's astonishing. Like you see literally an academic sort of religio philosophical academic system that from Morocco to India literally allowed this man to travel for free, to provide him with funding, with fellowships, to study for to do some things, go to another place, introduction, letters. So it's astonishing to see the level of the network that actually sustained this model for over a millennia. And then it was replaced with the European model and stuff, and that disappeared. And the reaction to European colonialism was obviously the emergence of ideological Islam, the Islamism that we call today. It was not like they emerged as a way to challenge religion. But while at that time, Islam and why Islam suddenly started to attack Islamism, attack Nowruz or traditions, because the model was defeated by the Europeans. In a sense, in their minds, were replaced by the European model. And so for them to stand their ground and hold on to what they have, they had to hold on to what they thought as sacred, and that is religion, but a European version of religion, almost like a modern definition of religion that has devoid of culture. It's almost very modern in its definition. It's very modern in its composure and everything else. So that Islamism emerges to, in a way, to challenge the colonial system that is so powerful and predominant. But fundamentally, it become more European in its behavior, despite the clothing. It's like it removes that traditional culture out of it and become an ideology by itself. So it's an interesting way to look at that. I don't know if it might make sense to people, but that's what I thought.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I think you partially touched on on the system that sustained this and existed. I think one big part of that system was waqf,
Waqf,
endowment,
yeah, yeah,
which has completely disappeared. And
yeah,
a couple of years ago, I got really fascinated by by this question: why has it disappeared? In Afghanistan, we have a ministry called Ministry of Hajj and Waqf,
yeah.
and up until that time, I didn't realize Waqf was actually talking about endowments, where people endow their things
There
for
is a
studies.
fascinating book by oh my God, I just suddenly his name Robert McChesney, by Robert McChesney, looking at Waqf in Mazar Sharif and Central Asia, and all the way until the 19th century. It's an amazing book that sees you see the level of the networks and the resources that is available for scholars to operate and stuff. And in Afghanistan, the concept of Waqf remained independent of the state all the way until 1890s. And by the end in 1890s, as a part of the Abdurrahman Khan's process of centralization of authority, Waqf was nationalized and became part of the government because he removed the tribal powers, but also removed the only other source of independent financial source that existed. So at around 1890s, he brought Waqf completely, for the first time in history of Islam in Afghanistan, under the direct control of the state.
And
And it's
presumably reduce the number of, the amount of waqf that people would give, or give, because prior to
he
that, you would give
taxed
it to
it.
some guild,
He
to some
taxed it.
local.
He
Yeah.
started taxing it, but when you tax it, then automatically. So this is like a psychological thing. People used to do a lot of the put money and resources into Waqf because it was independent. As soon as the state took control of it, I, we don't like the state to begin with. People started to trust, like you don't trust it anymore. So like, okay, I'm gonna put my stuff into that. It's enemy managed by the state. So
It's a natural thing, if a local
yeah,
person, local thing from your province
yeah.
that is managing it, that you
I
trust
know the
them more
person,
than
yeah.
somebody who's impersonal
That's
and you don't know. So absolutely.
yeah. So it's like Waqf declined in Afghanistan. And still there is a Waqf, for instance, Mazar Sharif has its Waqf, and different shrines has its Waqf. In Herat, the last independent Waqf was Herat's shrines, Herat Mosque Waqf, which was 0.5% of the Herat custom continued. And Ashraf Ghani took control of it and removed it from that's why the Herat Mosque declined. And there was not much. renovation, everything almost stopped. And that, though for centuries, since the Timurid period, 0.5% of the custom was annually going to maintenance of which is huge. Herat is a border city, so it's a huge amount of money to maintain the Herat shrine and Herat historical monuments. But Ashraf Ghani, one of his great geniuses,
Mhm. Removed the revenue
revenue and
for
make
this
did
for
it
this fund.
nationalized it. Yeah, nationalized it.
Um, I think we've been kind of talking about it in the periphery of it, but I guess it's a stretch from your field of expertise as well. I guess what would be the main objections, like these ideological, rise of ideological movements within Muslims and within Muslim societies? What are some of their main arguments against Nowruz? What is it about Nowruz that they object to and say, okay, this is the thing that is non-Islamic, therefore we don't want this
Yeah.
to happen?
If you remove the typical, if you think beyond the typical critique of, oh, there is not mention of a Quran or something, the fear of Nowruz is because it has the potential for social mobilization. It's an alternative source of authority, a cultural authority, and only authoritarian systems goes after these things or trying to absolutely control it. It's literally an alternative source of public gathering, public deliberation, public discourse, which is not done by the state. And I told you in Afghanistan, it is fundamentally funded, sustained, and organized by the locals, by the ordinary people, by the guilds, by the business community, and stuff. So it's a challenge directly to authority. You either take completely control of it and trying to organize it and create rituals around it as a state, which for an ideological state, like for instance in Taliban, it's an Islamism. So Islamism does not have that freedom, for instance, that the Central Asian states have to take ownership of Nowruz and turn it into a national thing, but under the management of the state. Taliban does not have that. So you have to completely, because it's an alternative source of authority. It's fun because, I mean, nowhere else you can gather that many people. 100,000 people gather in one city in one event. I mean, and then I kind of did a rough calculation in my mind around the number of people gathering for that particular day. You can actually find around about 25% of the population gathers in that particular day in different parts of the country for one specific purpose. If somebody wants to mobilize, that's the best thing. It's a source of authority. Who else can do that? So it's a challenge to authority. That's why they do that. And but they wrap it around this narrative of, oh, there is not textual approval of Nowruz. It's like Zoroastrian. It has never been Zoroastrian. Nowruz was never a religious Zoroastrian tradition. It existed before Islam. It's not necessarily a religious tradition. Islam
Mm.
religionized it in a way, sanctified it. But it was not, Zoroastrianism did not have that model of sanctification than Islam.
Like you said, it baffles me because I mean, my personal childhood experiences with Nowruz is completely embedded within religion, within Islam.
Yeah,
So
within
essentially,
Islam. Yeah.
I grew up in a small village in north of Afghanistan, in Baghlan province. So what you do is you go and study with the local imam, which is in your mosque.
Yeah.
Every village has a mosque, and to just kind of explain, the setup. Every village has a small mosque, and then it has a dedicated imam that gets appointed by the villagers, and then he gets
Yeah.
paid through zakat and other things, like harvest. And this person's job is to lead the prayer and teach the children.
Yeah.
That's the essential part of the functions of the imam. So I studied under a local imam who had been probably, educated in that locality in a similar way. And Nowruz is such a big thing for us. So we would go to the imam, and then on the day of Nowruz, the imam would write small Nowruz poetry, and in return, we would give him a gift. So this is like a whole ceremonious thing. On that day
Mm.
of Nowruz, you don't study. You go to the
Yeah.
imam,
Yeah.
and he has prepared already these
Yeah.
little writings on pieces of paper, and then he gives it to you. And in return, you bring something
Yeah.
from home and give it to him. And this happens for 2 or 3 days, probably, or one day, depending on where you are in Nowruz. And it is from the mosque. So it's within the
Yeah,
mosque that this
yeah.
celebration
It's
happens
embedded. Yeah, yeah.
with the
It's
kids.
fundamentally embedded in Islam. And it's an alternative definition of Islam that the Taliban at least find it very challenging. It's a direct challenge to their narrative of Islam, their discourse about Islam. I mean, it just challenged them to the core.
And also, when I grew up, so basically I started reading all the classical poetry and the work of literature by Persians, by Rumi and all the other poets that we have in our region. They're all Muslims. They're all Persians, and they
Yeah,
all celebrate Nowruz, and they
yeah,
all talk about Nowruz,
yeah,
and they have numerous things. And I think I'm very big fan of Maulana, so I know he's using this to
yeah,
talk about, regeneration,
yeah.
reforming yourself, waking up, and so on. And I think there is also a dangerous trend from the other side of the extreme where nationalist Persian movements try
Oh,
to
yeah.
say that,
Oh, yeah.
yeah,
Thank you for
this
reminding me.
this is it's almost like the opposite mirror end of the Taliban, right?
Yeah,
So
yeah, yeah.
they try to say this
I
now
saw
was
it in
belongs.
Afghanistan. I saw it like some Tajik nationalists in Afghanistan was like extremely vocal about like this is our tradition, and they came into Mazar Sharif too. There was a massive debates happening, and it kind of annoyed a lot of people because in Nowruz, a lot of people, and they, here the Islamic version of Nowruz came and just says, no, no, it's, and they reject the Islamicity of Nowruz. They're trying to make it a very secular thing, and they bring play Shahnama things, and they trying to downplay the kind of religious aspects, which is actually very, very dear to the people. And I realize it's, I mean, if you get out of that group, people really see Nowruz as integral to their faith. And good luck challenging the faith of the Afghan people in general. I mean, you keep it's but I saw that there was like a massive debate, and there was like REOE concept of like the Aryan crap, and the idea that it's like one group specifically has the ownership and it has nothing to do with Islam. And so yeah, yeah, that absolutely
It's just
exists.
baffling to me. What I don't understand. So for example, take Shahnama. I mean, for Ferdowsi, right? So the poet
Yeah,
who wrote Shahnama, he is a Muslim. Like, he has this
fundamentally. It began with a hamdu
nasheed and
sana.
that and so on. And
Yeah,
he is a Muslim himself, and he is sponsored by a Muslim ruler, Sultan, who's writing, this book. And then somehow that becomes the reason for irreligiosity of Nowruz. So we're
yeah,
dealing with
yeah,
these
yeah, yeah.
puzzling
This
and
like this
paradoxes of
puzzle,
life.
this extreme like nationalist things that also I that's why I found Nowruz, people get together. I avoid using the word nationalism in my book. I use the word nationless, but in English you can do that. In Persian, we have trouble to kind of playing with that word. So I think I found a way to see, I found a sense of togetherness and Nowruz without sense of miligaroi. Like you suddenly feel like people get together. It's really, really humbling experience because it's not rejectionist. I think we are finished or something, right? Or something.
We're almost it's been 1 hour, and
Okay.
thank you for the time. It was a fascinating
No, just
conversation.
that phone was suddenly cut something like something's happened in the screen. So that's what I thought. That
Um,
we finished or something.
there's a
Anyway,
slight change in my screen as well, but
yeah.
I think yeah, that was maybe a sign that said you've been talking for 1 hour. So I just
Okay.
realized it's been 1 hour. So if there's anything you want to add, we can add more
Well, I want to
minutes.
thank you for giving me the opportunity, and I hope to bring. I hope to have it published very soon. I'm now the, but it will be like the first thing that. Thank you for giving us an opportunity to have a conversation because I think we are the first generation to talk about our traditions, not being completely driven by ideology or by foreigners. It's like an indigenizing our own culture, re-indigenizing our culture by understanding how the nuances and stuff. And thank you for giving the opportunity for
Thank you
to share
for
it with
coming and
you.
talking. I think it's a important topic, and I think it should be raised, and we are raising it in the right context. We're trying to bring people together, not to reject. So this is, I think, the most powerful message we can end with. Yeah. Good luck with publishing the book, and looking forward to reading it. And yeah, yeah. Thank you
Tashakkur,
for
tashakkur.
talking
Thank
to us.
you, thank you,
Okay.
thank you. Bye.
Take care. Bye bye.